organizing principle in the emergence of the interaction spheres is the geographic setting of three spheres, the oceans and gulfs, facilitate the movement of ideas and products through maritime vessels. Another iteration of the Quincentennial is the West Philippine Trade or Interaction Network was published by Mactan in 2016. It is Mactan, and it more clearly fleshes out the connection or the connections with the Philippine archipelago. A recent publication featured a case study of two crucial nodes in Mactan's 2016 so-called secondary route passing through the Philippine archipelago, specifically the islands of Calayan and Luzon. This is a co-authored paper with Dr. Sarmiento, Ms. Rufino, and Ms. Hilario. While sparked inland, these crucial conduits saw the passage of vast tonnage of ancient ships, most notably before the start of Spanish colonization in the archipelago. In the mesoscale, the Northeast Mindanao geographic setting also facilitated the establishment of the interaction spheres as various networks of interaction, linking upland producer settlements with bulking stations and bulk breaking points in between, and of course on the near the sea, the coastal maritime trading centers. As a parallel intra-regional example, it is argued that the geographic setting facilitated the agency of the interior primary producers in the transactions with the lowland settlements, the purported evanescent market system. It is, however, with the increased demand of products from the uplands that the coastal maritime trading centers arguably manipulated the system to be able to control the flow of capital to the uplands through debt patronage. This receding agency resulted to the establishment of more permanent market systems. And up north in Northwest Luzon, the spectral transformation from evanescent to more permanent markets, in fact, took place between the 14th to the 16th century, just at the beginning of the Spanish colonial period in the islands, what can be called the final early historical period. The entry of the Spanish colonizers introduced state governance in the economic realm of the islands, especially with the introduction of cash crop economies. So the area of interest for this paper, Northeastern Mindanao, specifically the interaction sphere around Butuan as a center of trade. For background, Victor Estrella, who was part of the conference, has authored several publications on the Butuan gold. One study, he exposed the processes and actors involved in illicit trade for gold in Butuan. It is important to note that the ancient gold that has been recovered from the place, including the Balangay vessels, according to Estrella, has sparked a romanticism of gold that is still found in the area, thus resulting to treasure hunting. Also, Estrella establishes that Butuan historically was a center of commerce in northeastern Mindanao during the 10th through the 14th century. So he is my colleague, and I hope we can work. I could contribute in the geographic aspect, and he can definitely contribute in the historical, archaeological aspect. Now, what are the available information on the historical mines that was used for this paper? So for one, the research was able to get a Mines and Geosciences Bureau mining tenements control map. Now, though this is a map of present mining interest in the area, this is still important to give us an idea of the rich gold deposits of the area and possibly some of the older mines that have been mined in the older mines in the area. And aside from this, a map with the historical mines was georeferenced and digitized. This was a map that appeared in the publication of Tagibao and Takahashi, published in 2018, which shows the areas with historical mines. These are within the red circle. So the next step, upon getting all the sources was to georeference all these points. So we have the Butuan as the Coastal Maritime Trading Center, and then the different historical mines as presented in that 2018 publication. So this is the base map. At this point, this slide, we are using a proprietary world imagery map from ESRI, the company. And here we have the georeference locations of the maps or of the mines and the Butuan. So for the Butuan, I use the Balangay Shrine as the absolute point. But for our purposes, these are large-scale maps to meso mid-scale maps. So this will suffice, but later in high-resolution studies, we can actually pinpoint archaeological sites within the area. So Balangay, the Balangays, but for now, let's just use the Balangay Shrine. So yeah. So this is list cost path modeling, and this is an example of the LCP, which was implemented in Northwestern Luzon. Present-day roads that lay alongside the LCP are prime candidates for the secondary analysis. This is because of the middle range theory in archaeology, which proposes that human behavior in the past, not only in terms of artifact formation, but also trail formation or wayfinding, even navigation of people in the past, it still applies today. In fact, as pointed out earlier, the ancient trails are actually, as will be shown in this paper, ancient trails may eventually evolve and integrate pedestrian trails, pack animal routes, wagon roads, and modern and paved roads, which is the case for the ancient Hopi trails. So this cross-cultural example, the Hopi trails transportation network, trails and roads overlaid one another over time, which is the present-day Arizona State Route 264 in the United States. So in order to carry out the LCP, you need to use environmental variables. The LCP algorithm in GIS. So first, we had to determine the baseline, or let me define LCP. So LCP is a computer-generated optimum route. So it's a computer-generated optimum route through a cost surface from a source to a destination that exhibits the smallest accumulative cost. So in layman's term, the easiest route, the most convenient route, so to speak. So in this paper, I determined the baseline trail from historical mines to Butuan using a digital elevation model, as you can see in the slide, of the terrain. The purpose for the LCP is to have a baseline model of the best trail. So again, the best trail, given the environmental variables leading from extraction sites to the shipment site in Butuan. Now this quote-unquote functional baseline model, LCP, and again, this is important, can be utilized in a future secondary study, which will involve the actual ground truthing and archaeological survey of trails and ancient settlements in the area of interest. It is expected that some parts of the LCP will coincide with ancient trails or evolutions of these terrestrial passages, from trails to paths to roads, or another situation where the trails do not conform to the LCP. So in the first instance, we can argue that the formation of trail, path, road was following the principle of, again, convenience, least amount of effort based on the natural, topographical, or geographical relief. If we see the second instance, which is the nonconformity, then that means, or possibly means, there are cultural factors that influence the decision on where to set up the trail. In studies in Northwest Luzon, I have demonstrated that oftentimes this has something to do with nodal settlements, so parts of a series of settlements that are nodes to that trail. that are taking advantage of their middle person position in the flow of trade, or simply they are strategically located in bulking areas or bulk breaking points. So bulking areas where you bulk together your backpacks, the contents, and then probably transship it to a raft. Bulk breaking points is the opposite. From a raft, you divide the load into backpacks and carry it in a terrestrial trail. The LCP created was then overlain on planet scope imagery, which was provided by the Pedro Center of the OST, and world imagery from ESRI to remote sense features in the vicinity of the LCP. The areas with possible archaeological features will be earmarked for the secondary study or the archaeological ground truthing with survey. This DEM is then converted using an aspect algorithm. The raster map, the aspect raster map visually communicates the direction or orientation of any slope that appears within the pixels of the map. So this is a factor when you decide to move from A to B. So how do you select your path? So it depends on the face of the slope or the aspect. And then aside from the aspect, another factor, environmental variable, is the slope. So the DM was also converted to a slope algorithm, which creates a raster map that visually communicates slope degree or percent information. The higher the slope degree or percent, of course, the more difficult to navigate that path. So the gentler sloping areas are preferred based on that, based on the LCP. Now, as a prelude to least cost pathways modeling, we use those two previous rasters. And again, just to define LCP, so it is generated, a computer-generated optimum route through a cost surface from a source to a destination that exhibits the smallest accumulative cost. The cost surface has to be generated based on two secondary raster maps, based on those earlier maps I showed, which are the cost distance raster map and the backlink raster map. This is the cost distance raster map, a map that shows that from a source location, locations that can be reached at low cost from the source are in lighter colors, so towards light orange, versus locations farther from the source are more costly to reach, which are indicated here in this raster as darker colors, heading towards the blue. Whereas the backlink raster map will show each color represents the direction towards the neighboring cell with the least accumulative cost. So mainly based on the aspect map, which I presented earlier. So after factoring in these two secondary maps, the least cost path algorithm was undertaken to determine the best trail with least accumulative cost based on the two. So here are the results. Here you see the primary LCP. We term it as the primary LCP because this is the destination and these are the trails branching off from the destination. So it branches off from the source. Again, based on those environmental variables. So you notice one heads northeast, the other heads southeast, eventually to connect with the historical mines. So just to show you the destinations or sources, anyway, the trip can be go either direction. So in this case, can be Balangay being the destination. So your source will be the mines, or it can be reverse, probably a return trip from the Balangay site going back to the mines. So these are the routes based on those environmental variables. And here you see a secondary LCP. Secondary because it branches off from the primary trail, LCP trail, and it leads or it lands at the Placer area, which is indicated in the 2018 publication as one of the mines or historical mines. Another location is in the boundary of Jabonga and Kichao. Here you see the computer-generated list cost path or LCP. And again, this is a secondary trail branching out from that northeast primary computer-generated LCP. So that's the northeast. For the south, we have the three historical mines according to the 2018 publication. So Moncayo, Compostela, and then boundary of Mako and Nabunturan. And here you can see how the secondary trails branch out from the primary trail. So just to create a collage of all the trails. So here, or rather a mosaic, here's a mosaic of the complete LCP for both primary and secondary connecting to the northeastern historical mines. Then in this next slide is the mosaic of the complete LCP, primary and secondary connecting to the southern historical mines. So bulking stations or bulk breaking points. And as you look at the, as you do the remote sensings, with an archaeological perspective, you try to note cultural modifications in the area. So archaeological features on the ground based on what you can see remotely. The route may feature terrestrial point-to-point or terrestrial with riverine route with bulk breaking points in nodes where products are transshipped. So two possibilities. So point-to-point, you don't have to use the river, it's just terrestrial, or you can have that option, terrestrial and riverine. And that's important because it allows economies of scale where you can ship more. Albeit it's going to be slower, but you can ship more on a raft rather than to carry that on a backpack through a terrestrial trail. A core thesis is that the trail digressions from this LCP baseline modeling wrought out of environmental variables would possibly reflect social or historical factors, especially the entry of, or for instance, the entry of key players who successfully control the trade routes and the comings and goings in between the producers and the coastal traders. So that's an example of more cultural aspect or a variable. So let's look at some examples. For the South historical mines of Moncayo, Compostela, and Mako Nabuturan, it should be noted that the convergence happens near or at Moncayo. So this is an example of a convergence point. And by the way, that's the river laying right in these areas that are computer-generated LCPs. So again, possibility for transshipment can happen at Moncayo. So first, all these products, possibly from Compostela and Mako Nabuturan, are bulked together here at this point in Moncayo. And then just northwest of Moncayo, so not exactly at the mining area, but near the river, and then possibly shipped down river. And in fact, there are settlements in the area. There are villages in the area. So it would be very interesting to look at the history of these villages. When were they founded? Spanish period. They were founded in the Spanish period. Or is there an old church in the area? Are there archaeological features in the area? So something that we can definitely validate once we have the opportunity to do the secondary analysis. So in effect, just a zoom in of that area. So Moncayo would qualify as a bulking site or a bulk breaking site. And again, it can be a reverse also, where this part is where you unload the goods from the raft and distribute it to backpackers to carry upstream. Now, for the Northeast historical mines, Jabonga features the convergence point and it skirts Lake Mainit, which is in the northwest here. The same argument goes for dislocation, just as in the south. So the bulk breaking, possibly bulking areas. Now, from this point of convergence, the logical options of primary producers coming from the two mines, either to hike using terrestrial trail, maybe in conformity with the least cost path model, or to bulk their goods and transport via transshipment itinerary that moves through the overland trails to Lake Mainit, then the Jabonga Tubay River, possibly through rafts or bangkas, heading to Butuan. In effect, Jabonga would also qualify as a bulking site or bulk breaking site, and again, can be also in the reverse direction. So it should also be noted that the LCP model passes through a series of settlements, as I have noted earlier, series of present-day settlements, and this is the case for all, or for the two primary routes and the 5 secondary routes. The primary routes, again, are the routes from the convergence points to Butuan, so the destination, whereas the secondary routes are the routes from the convergence points to the 5 historical mines. Nodal settlements, or a nodal settlement means it is a possible middle settlement in a series, again, in a down the line trade. So you have nodes with possible middle settlement in a series of settlements supporting a permanent market. And here in this area of interest, the nodal settlement can also function as rest stops. So for example, here in northwestern Luzon, one nodal settlement location is overlooking, it's on the ridge of a mountain overlooking the windward and the leeward side of the mountain. So it's nice rest stop, but also strategic, so defensive. So that can be, and that's why you can also carry out the village stability analysis, which will show what are visible from a certain point in the landscape. So the nodal settlement can function as rest stops, bulking stations, or bulk breaking points. And some of the examples, so here's a settlement in Santiago, Agusan del Norte, that straddles along the LCP, and again, the river is just right there beside this computer-generated LCP. So gives you two options. You can do a terrestrial transport or riverine transport. Another example in Tubod, Surigao del Norte. And this one is parallel to a present-day road. So just going back to what I said earlier, the middle range of theory of archaeology, specifically in the study of ancient trails. So it's possible that trails evolve over time if they follow the same variables, so environmental variables. So the exception would be if there are cultural factors that get involved. So I mean, this is something we encounter all the time when expressways are built. Why doesn't the expressway go straight in an otherwise plains area? So maybe to pass through a village, maybe there's some commerce involved. So as you know, if as roads, shift from certain villages to other villages, so that means that has impact on the village commerce economy. And for example, growing up, I see that with some of the villages I used to pass through in Tarlac when I traveled through the MacArthur Highway. So these are bustling villages with big businesses. But now that you have the TIPLEX, NLEX new expressways, so there's probably a bit of an impact in the economy of these cities, municipalities along MacArthur Highway. Another example is Las Nieves, Agusan del Norte. And again, note the riverine option that complements the terrestrial option. And then the same, also seen in San Luis, Agusan del Norte. And another example, Bunawan, Agusan del Norte. So these are just some of the remote sense areas of interest that are earmarked for validation. And there are probably more. This is a very wide, very big area to cover. But so far, in the couple of months, I was able to identify these primary candidates. And just an interesting slide. What follows is the LCP actually passing through a gold mine, the Siana gold mine tubod, which is currently being, I think, it's owned or not owned, but it's being processed by an Australian company. Now, another possibility that was within reach based on the data that was provided by Pedro, the space center in DOST, ASCII DOST, was the use of infrared because the data planet scope also has the infrared band. But these are 3-meter resolution satellite imageries. So just to, it's important to note that. So not too high resolution. Now, if you have high resolution infrared band, it would a bright red in the infrared in the image. It may indicate watered, well irrigated vegetation, whereas areas that are dark are bare earth to dry surfaces. In the case of the irrigated vegetation, one could ideally see the boundaries between primary forest and secondary forest. So ideally to give you, although it's not that simple, an access to maybe forest management, if there was one being undertaken by earlier settlers in the area. And in some cases, even see cultural modifications brought about by cultural modifications, so archaeological sites. So in the case of bare surfaces, so again, appearing as dark, there might be a reason why there's no vegetation. Perhaps something's impeding the growth of the plant. So it's just buried and has to be excavated. But that's high resolution. This satellite data is not higher resolution. It's a 3-meter resolution. And just to give you a comparison, so the high resolution satellites will allow you to see a football from space. So 3 meters, you can see maybe a pedicab from outer space at 3 meters resolution. Not a bicycle or a motorcycle, but maybe a tricycle. Using the available imagery, there is a noticeable extent in the cultural modifications cutting through original forest cover. So as expected because of the settlements in the area. Of course, utilizing the resources in their surroundings. Actual archaeological features could not be determined at the resolution. High resolution satellite imagery is recommended for secondary research. So these are just some of the examples. So on the one hand, you can see the natural appearance, but if we use the infrared, so, well, the details are not so clear. The upper right is a world imagery base map from ESRI, and then the planet scope on the infrared. So you can see the difference in resolution. The ESRI map has an even better resolution. But anyway, you can see the extent of extraction, perhaps, or the utilization of resources surrounding villages. And again, though it's not that simple, perhaps talk about the forest management of the area, not only at present, but even in the past. Another example, and this time it's that terrestrial trail alongside the riverine trail, Tubay, Agusan del Norte. So I'm just showing you examples at this point. Another example, Bunawan, Agusan del Sur. So it wasn't too useful for this present paper because of the resolution, but I hope to eventually be able to request for higher resolution. And the thing about this Doves satellites is they are multispectral, but uh, I did not get a panchromatic. The panchromatic allows us to pan sharpen the image and be able to increase the resolution, spatial resolution, and be able to conduct a more accurate remote sensing exercise. So that's it. No, in my discussion slide, and just to highlight, so a core thesis. That's why by some of my slides I showed you uh, the LCP, the villages along the LCP, some areas that are parallel to the river, and then also the roads, present day roads, or even so maybe cemented or farm to market roads, but present day roads that lay alongside the LCP are prime candidates for the secondary analysis, the ground truthing. And again, this is with the middle range theory in archaeology, which proposes that human behavior in the past will be manifested in some way in the modern landscape. So following the very same environmental variables. So the applied GIS, for example, they determine the best route from going to a school. So where will they set up a school? So this variables are included in an applied GIS. So the slope, the aspect, uh, so these are included in the determination of the best location. So this applies, the middle range theory not only applies in terms of artifact formation, but also trail formation or wayfinding or navigation of people in the past. In fact, as pointed out earlier, the ancient trails may eventually evolve, integrate pedestrian trails, pack animal routes, wagon roads, and modern unpaved roads, which was also a case in the US, the Hopi trails. Some areas in northwestern Luzon where I carried out this analysis for the dissertation. So we can see those evolved paths from trails. So what's important is to be able to do the ground truthing to look for or to verify if indeed these are evolved trails, what we see as present day routes. So this is merely the beginning, and this paper is just the beginning, as the cliche goes. We have only delineated a baseline model, so we start with a baseline model, but that's just a starting point. It's not the end. It's not even middle. It's just the very, very basic beginning of this research. What has to follow would be the ground truthing and field verification. So armed with the maps, so these maps, these plots, the LCP plots, high resolution. So these are not so good resolution, the one I used in the presentation, but better resolution. Now the important exercise that would follow would be to compare how the baseline model or this environmental model would compare to the actual historical routes and passages. So it would be good to also dig the archives to look for maps of settlements in the area, Spanish period. So that's something we can do also. These regressions from logic, so the environmental variables, the cultural model, so to speak, the digression, would be occasions where we see a plethora of cultural reasons like inter-village politics, warfare, kinship, etc. No? So for the secondary analysis, it is proposed that when fieldwork is possible and armed with the right tools and resources, a validation fieldwork be conducted wherein a systematic archaeological survey and in some case excavation be carried out on the area of interest that have been identified in this very preliminary study. What is important to note early on is that one, trails merge at some point before Butuan, so it's good to investigate if these are bulking points or bulk breaking points. Number two, the trails lay alongside some modern roads and rivers, so it would be good to investigate if indeed there's a transshipment from terrestrial to riverine, or are they evolved trails, these modern roads that we see in the area, or farm-to-market roads. And number three, the trails that pass through some settlements, which at times are also the merger or divergence branch of the trails. So are these settlements extend, are they very old settlements that extend to this period before Spanish contact, when Butuan was this bustling commercial center? It is also recommended to, again, procure even higher resolution imagery for the remote sensing exercise, and one with the panchromatic band in order to carry out, again, the pan sharpening, which will allow us to improve the resolution. But at the moment, it is really, I'm really grateful to the Pedro ASTI DOST for providing the satellite imagery, to Dr. Feliz Noel Rodriguez and the organizing committee of the conference. Thank you for this opportunity. And these are the sources of the base map and the digital elevation model. So thank you so much. And I turn over the floor again to Marga. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Canilao, Migs, for your insightful presentation on predictive modeling of the gold trade, actually all trade with Butuan. The correlation between the ancient trails and present-day roads and settlements suggests the existence of this permanent market, as you put it. The evidence certainly suggests so. But before we proceed with the second presentation of Mr. Esguerra this morning, let's take a 10-minute break and reconvene here at 9:55 at everyone's pleasure. Thanks again. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
Thank you, Marga. So 10-minute break.
Ibarin ang takot sa iyong damdamin, ipamalas ang angking galing.
Tumayong mong tapang harapin ng buhay, yakapin ang tagumpay. Tulungan ang kapwa't bigyang halaga, huwag hatakin ng pababa.
Isipin wag sana ang sarili lang, pakisama't bayanihan.
Subukan nating isulong at ligawan ang
Magandang bukas, ikaw at ako magkasama tayo, salubungin ang kinabukasan.
Bayaning Pilipino sa makabago panahon.
halina't hawakan ang aking kamay, sabay abutin natin ang tagumpay. Patuloy lang tayo sa pagpapanday, iwalat sa Diyos ang sandat at kamay.
Bukan natin isulong at ligawan
the dream and the fire from within. Our hearts engulfed in flames, and it's been burning ever since. With our history in mind, we move forward with the times. In this new world we will shine. Together we will fly so high. We break the storms, we scale the walls, rise from the fall. We've come so far, we fought the wars for the sun and stars. We wear these scars, we've come so ang laban ng nakaraan, ating napagtagumpayan. Sabay ang makabuluhan, ating bigyang kahulugan. Malayo na ang narating, malayo pa ang larating. Ang hamon ay haharapin, pangarap ay tatawirin. We break the storm, we scale the wall, rise from the fall. We've come so far, we fought the war for the sun and sky. We wear these scars, we've come so far. With hope and love, we stand so proud. Now everyone will sing out We break the storms, we scale the wall, rise from the fall. We've come so far, we fought the war for the sun and stars. We wear these scars, we've come so Hindi natin pagkalimtan ang dalan laging halinan. Hindi natin pagkalimtan ang dalan laging halinan.
Break. It is likewise my pleasure this morning to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Kenneth C. Esguerra of the Ayala Museum. Mr. Esguerra, or Ken as I know him, has been an icon in the museum industry for over 3 decades. He began his career with the Metropolitan Museum of Manila, and since 2004, he has been with the Ayala Museum in Makati, where he serves as senior curator and head of conservation. Mr. Esguerra has a Bachelor of Arts degree with a major in anthropology from the University of the Philippines. Ken also did formal studies and training in museum conservation in Manila, Germany, and Thailand. At the Ayala, Ken has curated various exhibitions and collaborated with curators, artists, and conservators from the Philippines and all over the world. Aside from teaching at the University of the Philippines in the Manila and Diliman campuses, Ken also gives lectures and conducts training programs on museology, conservation, and art appreciation. Ken is the author of Philippine Gold Working Techniques for the journal Arts of Asia. Ken's talk today will focus on the gold working techniques of the Butuan finds. Ken, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miss Marga. Good morning, everyone. And I'm greeting you all the way from the province of Rizal in my hometown, the municipality of Taytay. Please allow me to thank definitely Miss Noel, Dr. Noel Rodriguez and Miss Kim Derama for having invited me to this Philippine International Quincentennial Conference, as well as the institutions that convene this, the Father Saturnino Urios University in Butuan City, the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, and the National Quincentennial Committee. Allow me to share my screen. I hope you can see my screen now. Okay, the title of my talk for this morning is How Were They Made? Examining the gold working techniques of the Butuan finds. If you joined us yesterday morning for the first day of this week-long conference, you have heard Dr. Capistrano Baker as well as Mr. Victor Estrella mention about the gold working techniques of the pre-Hispanic gold of the Philippines. So this topic assigned for me might seem like a summary or a review of what was said earlier yesterday. However, allow me to bring you and take you to a journey of over 30 years of the knowledge, data I acquired, as well as the information and experience in dealing and handling this material that we all call gold. To ask, why gold? What's so important about gold? What's so special about this material, this mineral, this metal? Why is it called the precious metal? Of course, gold, as I put it, makes the world go round. Others would contest perhaps its love. However, gold is quite important to everyone. And to find out really how important gold is, let us talk about its unique properties. The color. Obviously, gold is a color, and it is one of a few among the elements that has its name as its color. However, gold, the color of gold ranges from white to yellow, as well as to something that's a bit reddish. Gold has its distinct luster because it's metallic. And the property that really makes it so important is that the higher, the purer the gold is, it doesn't tarnish. It doesn't oxidize as well. Meaning, the purer the gold, less chance for oxygen to intervene for it to rust. And that makes it non-corrosive as well. Now, in most scale of mineral hardness, gold is placed between 2.5 to 3. And this scale is really from 1 to 10. 1 being the softest, and this is represented by tau, or the powder itself. And the far end, which is the numerical 10, is represented or is diamond, which really cuts through other minerals. The quality of gold or the property of gold that makes it very important and very workable as a metal is that it is highly malleable and ductile. Malleable meaning that you can bend it, stretch it, fold it, and pull it, and it doesn't easily break. Because gold itself has a high numeric value. In the table of elements, gold is represented by the letters capital A and U, aurum. Gold has an atomic number of 79, and 79 is really one of the highest in atomic numbers in the table of elements. Now, gold is also a good and excellent conductor of electricity, as well as the purer the gold, therefore it is hypoallergenic, meaning you cannot get any allergies out of this metal. Now, let's find out really the basic uses of gold. Definitely, gold has been used in coinage or for coins. In fact, old civilizations really made use of gold itself as coins. And in the Philippines, the Spaniards, upon arrival, noticed that early Filipinos had the so-called piloncitos, or gold converted into coins, like bits of coins, and they had marks on them. As well as gold is turned into bullions. Of course, we've heard about the gold bullions, especially of the former regime, of which are stored somewhere in Switzerland. Now, another use of gold is that it's a good conductor of electricity. That's why it's very well used in computers, circuit boards, appliances, and even our mobile phones. Even your SD card has a quantity of gold, and that gold, once you put it all together, can be recycled and brought back to its natural state or material, which is really gold. That's why you'll notice that in material recycling facilities, otherwise called junk shops, they would buy the circuit breakers that are broken from homes or households, because these are actually worked on so that the gold content in each circuit breaker can be extracted and be returned back to its original material. I'm sure you'd heard of the last Tokyo Olympics, wherein the awards, the gold, the silver, and the bronze, made use of recycled material from the various objects or parts that they were extracted from. Gold is also used in dental work, it being hypoallergenic and non-toxic at that. However, because of the expense or the value we put in the gold, we don't see anymore people having their teeth or tooth capped with gold. I remember as a kid, some of the older people had gold capped teeth during the time, and this was in the 60s. And of course, we love gold, and gold is basically the main material for most jewelry that we have, from rings to necklaces to earrings to headdresses to accoutrements or what have you. And jewelry is loved by most people. Let's try to find out really the historical context as far as gold is concerned. You know, we anthropologists are often faulted for being generalists. We tend to generalize and conclude, despite the fact that we do baseline data gathering, we do researches, we do cross-check, double cross-check, triple cross-check our data, and yet other fields say, oh, come on, you anthropologists, you tend to group people, cultures all together. So, allow me to be an anthropologist for this time, at this particular time, to conclude that gold equals humanity. Why is that so? And this I really tend to believe. All civilizations, big and small, value gold and really gave it at its utmost importance. These civilizations literally and figuratively paid the price to accumulate and acquire gold because gold is really valued, treasured, sought after, protected, gathered, and accumulated. And there's a tendency for humans really to stock up on gold. And because of that, there have been wars, battles, conflicts that led to trying to accumulate gold, trying to conquer weaker cultures or groups of people and eventually claim the gold that they have. Well, for that matter, it was the other two metals that really caused the conquering. And I'm talking of the iron and the copper that were turned into weaponry, blades, swords, spear points, shields, as well as present-day ammunition, firearms, bullets, guns. Too bad. And in doing so, gold was eventually achieved. There alone, you can see which is more valued. Is it iron or copper? So these two metals help get to the gold. So victory resulted using these two other metals for the accumulation of gold. Of course, gold approximates the color of the sun, just like among the Egyptians, their sun god Ra is in the gold color, and it's said that the flesh or the skin of their god, the sun god, is colored gold with that same luster. Let's go back home to the Philippines. The earliest or the extant documentation about gold use in this country was found in the Lumbang River in Laguna and dated to be AD 900 or during the Shaka 822. And this is termed the Laguna copper plate. It's a small piece whose history is that it was found by a man and knowing that it is copper, sold it to a materials recovery facility or a junk shop, thinking the junk shop owner thought that there will be value to it, brought it to an antique dealer. However, they couldn't get enough money out of this because it was just definitely made out of copper. And that's the reason why it lasted. Copper being inorganic has the ability to resist the elements. So, good thing the National Museum was able to acquire it, and now it's in their possession. It's a small piece of metal, 20 by 30 centimeters, again called the Laguna copper plate. However, when it was examined closely, it had this old script written in Old Malay, Kawi script, which was later on translated by the late Dutch anthropologist priest Father Antun Postma, who literally spent his lifetime here in the Philippines, particularly with the Hanunuo Mangyans of Mindoro. And with that knowledge, he was able to translate this that said that in the kingdom of Tondo, which is in Manila, there is this slave by the name of Namuaran who owed his master 900 grams of gold. And until he can pay off that debt, that's the only time he becomes a free man. So as early as this time, really, gold was used as a monetary tender in the country. Isn't that quite amazing? Next will be the Balangay boats. And of course, there'll be a series of lectures in this conference that will discuss these Balangay boats that of course are still being excavated in the estuary in the river of Agusan. And these have been dated in the circa 10 to the 12th centuries. They're roughly 15 meters in length. And what's the association of these Balangay boats to gold? Way back in the early 90s, I had a chance to visit the old site museum, National Site Museum of these Balangay boats. And because we had a special tour, no less than the curator of that particular site museum, we were able to open the old cabinets, and lo and behold, there were hundreds of these clay crucibles. And like what Mr. Victor Estrella discussed, these clay crucibles were really used to process the raw material that is gold and turn it into something else, which eventually will be of use to mankind. There were hundreds of these. However, in my last return, since that museum has already been renovated, I just hope that the National Museum saved all these crucibles and brought it here to their main office in Manila. Of course, the reason why we are commemorating the 500 years of circumnavigation is because of this infamous date, or shall I say famous date, March 16, 1521, when Fernando Magallanes, we all know Ferdinand Magellan, Portuguese, sailing under the Spanish flag in search of the Spice Islands or the Malaccas, accidentally landed in what is now known as Middle Philippines or Cebu. He had 5 ships under his command. There is the biggest one, which is the San Antonio. It was really huge. It can carry 120 tons. That's why most of their supplies were in this galleon, this ship. And there were 4 others, the Santiago, the Trinidad, the Concepcion, and the Victoria. Actually, it was only Victoria and Trinidad that made it to the Philippine shores. The biggest boat, San Antonio, and its crew conducted a mutiny against their captain, Magellan, because they found him to be strict. So the boat turned around, returned back to Spain, and declared that the rest of the ships got lost in open sea. And by the way, these galleons really lorded it over. That's why they were called the castles of the oceans during those times. And mind you, right after we were conquered, colonized by the Spaniards, for 250 years, from 1565 until 1815, these galleons plied the Manila to Acapulco route, carrying with them goods that exchanged between archipelagos islands and groups of people. Each galleon that sailed out of the Philippines carried with it gold bullions as part of our payment, being a colony of Spain. And it was delivered to the vice consul that was in Mexico. There you have it. Gold really being part of that trade. The next thing that identifies gold with us, with our ancestors, is this so-called Boxer Codex. Why was it called the Boxer Codex? It was formerly owned by Professor Charles Boxer, who in 1947, take note, 1947, it was 2 years after World War II, when this particular manuscript was auctioned off and was acquired by Professor Boxer. And in this Boxer, this codex, were data and watercolor illustrations of peoples from these groups of islands, namely the Tagalogs, the Cagayanons, the Visayans, even the Pintados. And it's really a wonderful documentation of who our ancestors were. And one thing, or the common denominator among these subcultures that already existed, is them to be able to harvest gold and fashion this material into ornaments and body adornments. You can see in these 4 illustrations how they really made use of gold extravagantly. You can see the shimmering, glittering effect of the gold that they wore. Quite amazing. And mind you, the codex doesn't only contain subcultures from the Philippines. It had other pages. Like it had Japan in it, it had Malaysia or Indonesia, and others which were given less pages than Philippine subcultures, because probably the author or illustrator of this codex really got fascinated looking at all these gold ornaments that the people wore during that time. In the exhibition that Dr. Florina Capistrano Baker co-curated at the Asia Society in New York City, we had the chance to borrow the original manuscript from the Lilly Library of the Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, USA. So we looked at each of these original pages, and really quite a fascinating documentation of gold data from the Philippines, colored illustrations at that. Now, going up to here in Luzon, As early as the 1613, a Franciscan missionary compiled a vocabulary that he lifted from Juan de Plasencia's vocabulario. And this particular encyclopedia, the Vocabulario de Lengua Tagala, had with it Tagalog names for goldsmithing, gold use, and all the ornaments fashioned into gold. Pedro de San Buenaventura was assigned somewhere in Laguna, in Nagcarlan, Laguna. And he moved the region so that he documented the words, and in particular noted of words associated with gold. It even had grading for gold. And if I may share, there's the word tumbaga. To early Tagalogs, and even when I was young, when they say tumbaga, that's not gold. That means it's something really less. Perhaps it's just copper. Now, if it were 12 carats at least, it was called bislig. Bislig, somewhat similar to the word bisig, meaning strong enough or sturdy enough. Then there's the 14 carats, often used for the regular gold jewelry. And the term is linglingin. And as you climb up the carat ladder, 18 carats would mean panika. And something that was less than 20 carats was called panangbo. 20 carats meaning hilapo or called hilapo. 22 carats. This is when it really becomes very shiny and glittery. It is called ginugulan. In the Tagalog word of ginugulan means to pay attention to devote time to, Google. And of course, 24 carats being pure or dalisay. Sometimes it was even called urin buo or lata, meaning really soft. Because gold as it is, because of its highly malleable quality, it is really so soft. You can bend it, you can even tear it. Okay, now may I proceed to the topic assigned to me, the gold working techniques, as I examined the pieces that belong to the Ayala Museum. The Ayala Museum actually started exhibiting its gold collection, which was curated by our former director, who's very knowledgeable in gold, who did a talk yesterday. He curated this exhibition in 2008, and it is one of our permanent exhibits of sharing this material culture that belong to us Filipinos, something that we really should be proud of. In examining the gold working techniques applied, particularly to the Butuan finds, it is really out of being able to handle this material myself and other gold artifacts that belong to the Bangko Sentral ng Filipinas, as well as other private collections that are peppered around the Philippines. We really have a lot of these gold artifacts. However, what remains is basically perhaps not even 10%. Because the problem with gold, because of its association to money, please remember again that any nation cannot produce money without an equivalent gold reserve. And definitely that is what is being monitored by the International Monetary Board, the Swiss banks. So we as a nation should have enough of the gold reserve so that we can produce our own money. But the real monetary tender is the gold, because gold will always be gold no matter what. And going back to that story, the sad part is any gold article or artifact found excavated from the earth, especially from the Mindanao area, from that part of the Philippines, sad to say, melted down to gold. In doing research work or actual field research, we went to the Maykawayan, Bulacan, to interview the Maykawayan jewelers, particularly working on gold and silver. And really, the sad confession is they told us the minute we receive any form of gold, sorry, melt it down to gold. That's it. Because we need the material. There's no historical value to it. It is only after the awareness of these finds that the consciousness is present. I'm sure in Butuan, a lot have been lost in the earlier years because eventually, well, and until now, down south, gold mining, whether it be the ore, the dust, the ingots, or articles or artifacts such as what we're discussing, the value is often equated to the gold value up to the present day or equivalent to the present day. And the sad part again is no questions asked. Our Bangko Sentral ng Filipinas would buy gold no matter what quantity, no questions asked. And of course, that is when there's that conversion from particular gold which is weighed, then sold immediately or straight to the bank. And as what Victor Estrella mentioned yesterday, it is not the finders, or I don't like to call them the looters. Let's call them, uh, how should I put it, workers, uh, uh, amateur archaeologists who, in looking for gold, would sell them to middlemen. And it is these middlemen that do a lot of killing or make profit out of these gold finds. Sad to say. Anyway, let's go to the first technique that is employed in preparing gold to become an article or something that is useful for humanity. The regular gold beating, hammering, or chasing. In this particular slide, I have here an implement which we suspect to be a tweezer. It's over 5 centimeters long with the pincer over 1 centimeter wide. It weighs 14.3 grams. And because I have that privilege to handle and install these things, you tend to use them. And they really work well. Imagine, during that time, they had gold material as their tweezers. So doesn't that say something else? Well, we can only conclude that gold was aplenty during this time. And we are putting the dates of these gold objects, we now call museum objects, between the 10th to the 13th centuries, loosely 300 years. And the reason for this is because of associated or relative dating. Since most of these finds were really part of funerary objects or those that were buried together with the dead. Because, of course, all civilizations again believe in life after life. And these are send-offs. Like Victor Estrella mentioned about Visayans having this notion that you cannot enter the portals of heaven if you do not have gold with you. So that the people tend to put gold together with the dead. That's why they became funerary objects or grave goods. And we know that that is the reason why early graves have been ransacked, even during the time of the Spanish colonization, because they knew that the peoples then had buried gold together with their dead. So, going back to this particular gold sheet that was bitten and folded and transformed into a tweezer, there is the hammering technique as well, wherein it's really the wrist action of the hammer that controls and manipulates the material to form it into some implement of this sort. These diadem fragments that were excavated in Butuan, Agusan del Norte, weigh 0.8 gram and 0.9 gram. And you can see how fine these sheets are. And there were perhaps part of a fragment that could have been sewn on to some textile headband that can signify power, just like your crown. This particular pair had these leaf-like snippets, very soft and malleable. And you can even tear these strips apart from the main body. Because the metal, the gold metal, was bitten to a flat sheet, it really flattened out. And the beauty with gold, because it is malleable, you do not lose any material out of the main material. You just spread it out to become a sheet. And you form it to your desired shape or form. Okay, what do we have here? A full ancestral mask, otherwise commonly called a death mask. This particular death mask again came from Butuan, full size. That alone tells a lot about the quantity of gold being harvested. Because of that belief again that once the body dies, some spirit or elementals can enter that body and conquer the dead body. There was a tendency to cover the orifices, like the eyes, the nostrils, the mouth, so that the spirit, the evil spirit of that cannot enter the dead body. And what better material do you have to repel and refract? Gold is your number one material at that. Here is another piece, another full mask. And take note of the design on the upper portion of the mask. It incorporates another working technique aside from snippeting and forming those diadem or crown-like features. But in beating the material to put to spread it out, to turn into some sort of a face, you can see really the character and perhaps who this dead being is. All those that have been recovered, whether down south or in middle Philippines, like in Palawan, in Leyte, and those that had traditions of putting orifice covers in the portals, in the openings, had similar of these orifice covers. However, no two are alike, meaning they were personal. And in some accounts, even the snippets from the discarded gold material were even buried with the dead. So that might as well use these snippets as send-off goods for the dead. To me, it's all about announcing, treat me well, I was rich on earth. So now that I'm dead, I have all these things with me to bring to the next life. Anyway, okay. The other gold working technique is soldering, or basically fusing two parts or portions together, making use of heat that can be dispensed from a tube. Well, in modern day soldering, they make use of gasoline, and the fumes from the gasoline, like what we observed from the Make Hawaiian jewelers, they had the foot bellow, then they would how should I put it, extract the fumes that would cause the flame, and the higher the flame, the readily the gold gets soft, so that it will adhere to the portion that the goldsmith would want to attach it to. And that technology alone, imagine 10 to 13th centuries, doesn't that talk of a complex civilization that already existed during those times? Meaning, a highly intelligent mind that already existed, that worked on this gold as a form of body ornament, or as used as ornamentation, and even to adorn and worship the deities and the goddesses that they had at that time. In these two ear ornaments, you'll see a red material right in the center, perhaps some colored stone. However, up to this time, we really haven't subjected it to actual testing to find out the material made made to arrive at this red central piece. Again, as I would put it, imagine the central piece is like some sort of red glass with gold around it, which means to them, which is more important during that time? Is it that red material in the middle, or is it the gold? Or maybe we can say and infer that they had a lot of gold. So, and they did not have this red material, which perhaps came out of the trade exchange. So put importance to that and do an encasing made out of gold to turn it into a pair of earrings. Cord weights, heavy, each one weighing 72.8 and the other one weighing 72.4 grams. And because of fusing or using the high temperature, these were bonded. There are actually 4 layers that you can see of the gold material, tubular material, in a pyramidal fashion and soldered together, attached together using high heat. But that alone, the heat itself, if it is really high temperature, and if you get to 1076 degrees centigrade, you melt down the gold that liquefies. So the artisans, the craftsmen during that time knew the temperature they were dealing with in attaching one part with the other. And this is really dependent on the softness and hardness of the gold material, as well as the low and high carat that the gold material contained. And in a table that I gathered, for a soft gold on the low carat weight, it needed 650 to 720 degrees centigrade, whereas a high carat needed 700 to 715, which is really the ideal temperature in fusing two materials together. The harder materials needed a higher temperature up to 830. However, going up to 1,000 can definitely melt and liquefy gold. And this is something that they were in control of. That alone is so fascinating as far as goldsmithing is concerned. Another working technique, which is really very basic and very simple, is cutting and punching. Simple as that. Making use of either a scissor-like implement or some sharp chisel and a mallet to cut the gold material into the desired form. This particular diadem fragment on our screen was excavated in Butuan, and it weighed 19.20 grams. It was in this state when we received it. What you can see, that plastic filament is really plastic, made out of Scotch tape. And of course, employing conservation methods, we took out the Scotch tape, especially its adhesive material, so that we can display this particular diadem to the audience. And with this particular gold diadem, you can see how fine gold can be beaten into and flattened into a sheet, and then to be able to do open cut work, or the term calado. The former owner was wise enough to attach it onto a Scotch tape so that you do not lose those parts, those tiny bits that would form the calado. I dare not sneeze at the time I was working on this, because if you sneeze, there goes the small fragments, and we did not want to lose any of these fragments that really talk about Philippine prehistory. Now, and you not associate the calado or open work with the calado we do with our textiles. Like on your right slide, we have here a close-up of your piña fabric with the calado method. And it is very much similar as part of the design process, whether it be gold, whether it be textile, particularly piña. Of course, they do it with other materials like silk and cotton as well. Okay, another sample that employs cutting and punching using calado is this orifice cover, kind of very fancy. You don't know whether those frills are your eyelashes and those strips are the eyes, with an ornate nose portion in the center. So there, aside from the actual working technique, you can see the artistry of old Filipinos, or Butuanons, if I may say so, in particular. This looks even stranger because you can see teeth So obviously, it was more of a mouthpiece rather than a nosepiece. And in fact, we did not clean it. It had all the stains made of soil or clay from the original uh, pit where it was excavated from in Butuan. As trivia, since we exhibited this gold, and of course Dr. Baker can attest to this, we never, since we did it and exposed it or exhibited it to the public in 2008, we never did any cleaning or polishing of any of these materials. And that alone is a testament of the purity of the gold content in each and every article on display. Okay, again, using that technique of cutting and punching to form shapes and other forms, you have here a hilt or dagger handle. Of course, the blade has been lost because more often than not, the blade will be iron. And because iron readily oxidizes, readily corrodes, it has been lost. However, I've seen and handled examples wherein the blade, an iron blade, is still part of the golden dagger handle. However, of course, it needed metal treatment or conservation to arrest the continuing degradation of the material itself. And for this particular hilt, can you figure out what it looks like? Doesn't that look like the beak of the sari manok from down south? There you go. This is the tail of our kulintangan, currently now on exhibit at Ayala Museum, and you can find the similarities. This kulintangan, or a set of gongs from the Maranao group, has for its body a wooden sari manok, and the tail is very much similar to what we have. And it employs the calado technique in producing the tail for your sari manok. Weaving, even more complex. However, not only do we use weaving for our baskets, our textiles, etc., but gold as well. This particular diadem has been fashioned into some sort of a particular style of weave, very much similar to what you do with your palm fronds or your baskets or even your salakot, your native salakot. And they really employ it. Cut gold into sheets and start doing the weaving. There you go, comparative basket, an actual basket made out of bamboo, and the diadem or a particular accoutrement uh, on the left, weaving gold. There is also the technique of wiring. You either twine it, twist it, braid it, coil it, because of the property of gold. So soft and malleable, easy to work with, you can fashion it into whatever you want. It really depends on the quantity of material. I did not particularly include the Surigao finds, the so-called Surigao treasures that we have in the collection and also in the collection of the Bangko Sentral ng Filipinas. And these are these belts that have been woven. They turn them into wires, braid the wire so finely and so tightly that in displaying the royal sash or royal regalia that we have at the Ayala Museum, I couldn't even push a .2 stainless steel insect pin into it to be able to hold it in place. I needed a finer .1 stainless steel insect pin so that the loop could be held on so that it doesn't slip off the main regalia. So really, this experience of dealing with such gold materials fascinates you a lot. That's why maybe I sound so ecstatic about it now. Now, going back to what we have, look at these wires or tiny strips that they did corrugation out of to use as hair ornaments, and each one weighing 5.7 and 5.6 grams. What we have here is a neck adornment or a necklace. If you look at the outer portion, then you'll notice the braiding that was done to this particular object. And those tube-like beads that have been arranged in the inner portion of the necklace are actually made of flattened and rounded gold sheets, tiny gold sheets turned into beads. Quite amazing when this was assembled into some. Mind you, all the gold working techniques are combined with each other. So plain and simple, pounding, beating, then hammering on the verse side, chasing it with a dull or blunt chisel. That's the term, chase and hammer we put on modern day work. Another example of hilt that incorporated coiling and braiding in its middle body. And you can see exactly in this close-up images of the wires that were coiled and braided like your abaca ropes and used as design and again maybe as part of the grip of this particular handle. Because obviously if it's just gold, plain surface, it will slip easily. But if you have these designs, there's the tendency for it to provide grip for the hilt. But of course, gold is very soft, and this was perhaps used during ceremonies and not during actual wars to ornate or to fancy to battle your enemies using this. Something just ceremonial. Okay, a more complex working method is granulation. This particular pendant weighs 3.5 grams, and it's so small. It's just like close to 2 centimeters long and 1 centimeter wide. But take note of the scalloping and those tiny pellets or granules attached onto the edge of this pendant. That's the design, simulating flowers, florets, all around that pendant. So fancy. And it is very small and minuscule, tiny. Again, when this was excavated, gun is the central portion or part of this pendant or body adornment. It might have been glass. It might have been some colored stone, gemstone that was traded from outside. But because of the element itself and the environment to which this was subjected to, if it were glass, then glass disease might have eaten up that material. However, gold still exists. And it's a good thing that the actual finder or amateur archaeologist was able to excavate it, did not sell this to the equivalent amount of gold at that time of the trade. It probably was the dealer that made a killing again for the value of this because of the history that goes with this particular pendant. Another example, and very fine example of your granulation technique, can be seen in these finials. Finials can be tassel ends, can be tubes or beads as well, to use as long for your long necklaces, weighing 21.5 and 21.3 grams. And you can see again those pellets, those tiny granules that decorate the golden surface. And if you look inside this cylindrical form, no adulteration. The quality of gold for the main material as well as the pellets or granules used are of the same carat weight or carat content. So again, it talks about quantity of gold they had and the craftsmanship dedicated to working on this particular finials. What do we have here? A pair of belt buckles. If you see the holes on each side of the buckle, you'll notice that there are these holes that would attach to the main material, which can perhaps be textile or leather or parchment. And again, the artisan, the goldsmith, made use of granulation to design and put ornamentation on to these buckles, gold buckles. Most of the time, the main pin, the U pin to attach these buckles have all been lost. We are thinking that perhaps they are made of some organic material that easily corroded, or it can be made out of U-fashioned wire or tube that must have been sold earlier by the finder or the one that picked it up from the earth for immediate cash before finally being able to sell this to some dealer who would know the value of these belt buckles. But if you look closely, they're indeed a pair because of the way they were designed. Here is 100 or over times magnification of the granulation method. See how those granules attached onto the surface itself. Again, being pounded and beaten to flatten and definitely attached on to the material. High heat, that melts. Low heat, that will not attach. You have to get to that exact degree centigrade for both portions or parts to adhere to each other. That is personally what amazes me with these things. Repoussé or repoussage is a metal working process that makes use of a blunt chisel and a hammer. Then you start beating the material from the back of the surface or the reverse side so that what you want to create is an embossed portion on the obverse side. It is opposite the hammer and chasing method that I mentioned earlier, when you do chase and hammering, you do it on the verse or the top side. Whereas for repoussé or repoussage, you do it on the reverse. However, the final thing that you'd like to show would be this reverse side because of the embossing. And when you look closely at this pair of ear ornaments, what do you see? Don't they look like that mythical bird, the Garuda? Yes, scholars say this is a pair of ear ornaments fashioned into the Garuda. But when we opened, the first time we ever opened that gold exhibition in 2008, and I'm sure Dr. Baker will remember this, we had Dr. John Mixick from the NUS, who specializes in Southeast Asian prehistory. He said that this Garuda I haven't seen from your neighbors. These are distinctively yours. During that conference, you can hear the amazement and even clapping from those that attended, especially the local collectors. It was some sort of an applause, meaning these belong to us. This is a side view just to demonstrate the technique applied to get that thing embossed. However, of course, soldering and fusing was also a part of it from the main repoussé work to the soldering or fusing and to assembling a very ornate material to be used for the ear. Here is a classic example of how it is done. This is a pectoral disc or something sewn on to perhaps fabric and on your chest. Wow. It's 37 grams by weight, and it is like 8 inches in diameter, big enough to be seen and recognized that you are in possession of such gold material. And you can see the cross, the 4 quadrants, and that floral-like central design, applying repoussé or repoussage to perform and achieve such design. Here is a particular excavated stone plate for repoussé, wherein you put the metal on top of it, then you start beating the metal so that it gets those shapes that you need out of that material. But the sad part is these templates are kind of rare because to begin with, they were disposed of and they were not part of the funerary items or grave goods. And they just were discarded. And until the actual workshop of a goldsmith of the yesteryears can be excavated, can we be able to achieve these templates? Victor Estrella showed other samples of these extant templates or casts or molds yesterday. Here is a close-up of that particular pectoral disc. Quite amazing, really. And you can see the softness of the gold, that shiny, shimmering feature. If I may adopt the term that Dr. Baker always uses, shimmering. It does shimmer because of the purity of this gold. Chastity covers or modesty covers used by adolescents of our ancestors. We happened to visit for a study tour, the staff of the museum together with our director sometime in Malaysia. And when we checked out, they had these modesty covers as well. However, we're in bronze, in silver. I did not see an example that makes use of gold. And in a personal visit to Makassar in South Sulawesi in Indonesia, and when I had to check out gold that was with a dealer, he had his collection in bronze, and it was only the central portion that some gold material was fused onto the piece. So again, we can say that maybe we had more gold in terms of material than our neighbors. Or maybe the craftsmen of yesteryears were more fancy than these other cultures of our neighbors. And it really talks about cultures and those that handled them in the past. So for this particular modesty cover, what do you see? Again, you see flower shapes, corals, and other designs making use of the repoussé method and bordered with a wire and a tube to attach it on with a fabric string and to hang it over the female's private part as part of the protection during the adolescent years. And they had it in Makassar, a particular display on this, except I did not understand Bahasa. And the person who was giving me a tour cannot interpret it for me. But I'd really like to devote more time to be able to study these things. This is another example that belongs to Ayala Museum. Perhaps the design is of a conch shell or a butterfly, and you can just see the artistry of the Butuanons forefathers. Casting and molding. These are the more solid materials turned into body adornment or jewelry. How do you do a mold? How do you do a cast? Present day casting makes use of the lost wax process, wherein it can be one single piece with a hole in it and the design inside that hole, or it can be in two halves with the design in the interior and putting it together to form a solid piece with a hole on top of it, and that's where you pour melted gold. It's called the lost wax process because eventually the wax will melt. However, the gold really gets the shape or the form that the artisan would want out of it. And for this particular pair of earrings, don't they look like lotus flowers or some sort of pointed headgear? But these are really ear ornaments excavated in Butuan, weighing 10.5 grams and 11.2 grams. That's quite heavy. Again, it didn't end there with the plain surfaces. You can see the braiding of wires on the edges of this material. This is a more classic example of achieving a design from a mold. It might look like a sea urchin, however, it's really an pair of ear ornaments. Very heavy, 25 grams, 23.1 grams. And really, the artisan did not stop with just these convoluted forms. He started punching those thinner portions of those convolutions to make it appear like your lubid or rope. This design is often called nilubid, adapting the Tagalog term lubid. So it might look crude. However, you can really see that that is the aim of the artisan. But again, because it molded the gold, and after the mold, he started reworking on it still. All I can say is because during the time, they had advent of time. No computers, no laptops. They just thought of the design and got that inspiration from the nature that surrounded them. This is my last slide. A pair of ear ornaments excavated somewhere in the Agusan province. I'd like to raise this issue. Quite heavy, 18.3 grams and 17.9 grams. You can see a combination of all the different working techniques to be able to achieve this pair of earrings. You have butterfly protrusions with open work, and again, you see the braiding done, and you can see how it was fused together. You see wires scrolled, and you can see those vessels or empty pieces. Perhaps they lost material. It could have been some colored stone or glass, etc. But it really looks so brilliant. However, again, the provenance just speaks of Agusan province. And the sad part to it is there are times when these finders, or shall I put them, looters, try really to mislead even the middlemen that buy it from them so that they still have their first dip into the different pits that they can dig up for the gold. So somewhat do tricking and mislead the middlemen. That's why, again, this thing is just a tip of the iceberg. A lot needs to be studied when it comes to pre-colonial, pre-Hispanic gold from the Philippines. However, this being our part of the history of our material culture, we Filipinos, Luzon, Visayas, down to Mindanao, and even all the way to Batanes, have been working on gold even before Ferdinand Magellan again got lost and landed in Middle Philippines that we call Cebu. With that, I leave you and I wish you a good morning and thank you for listening. Back to you, Miss Marga. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ken, for enlightening us on the properties and uses of gold, the different techniques of working with gold, and the history of gold in our country. Now we move on to the open forum, the Q&A. But before we do so, we'd like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Churchill and Dr. Baker, both with us today from the United States. Good evening to you both. And so now after, hi. After two fascinating presentations, we'll move to the open forum. For Zoom participants, you may write your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. For those who are participating through Facebook Live, you may write your questions on the comment section. The technical team will take care of keeping track of them and will forward it to us. You can ask one direct, concise question, and if needed, a follow-up question to either of our speakers this morning. If I could start with a question from Dr. Baker for Dr. Canilao. Migs, in layman's terms, what specific data can be gleaned by identifying LCP? Would you be able to identify gold working workshop locations, for example, or lead archaeologists to potentially productive archaeological sites? How would you go about doing this?
Thank you so much for that question. Very good one also. And just to begin to answer that, so we're still at the phase 1, phase 2 of this process. So phase 1, phase 2 in archaeology really is the background research and then using available data like remote sensing data. But I'd like to emphasize that a multidisciplinary approach is better rather than just a unilineal approach. So, like in the Northwestern Luzon research that I did, I was able to use or stand on the back of historians, ethnohistorians, oral traditions from different ethno-linguistic groups. So that's how I was able to integrate all these gold working areas, shops, settlements. So in moving forward here in this particular area of interest, I would recommend looking into Manobo, Mandaya, Pagobo, Bilaan, Tiboli, oral traditions, oral histories. Dr. Noel Rodriguez also had a question on archival maps, so that's also another important data set. So it's really a combination of methods that really makes this an exciting prospect in the future. Thank you.
Actually, there's a follow-up question from social media regarding your work, Migs. What similarities and differences do you see between the Butuan finds and the finds in the north for the same period that you studied in your book for the gold trade?
Thank you for that question. Well, as presented by our speakers in this conference, so orifice covers, so we do find those in sites also in Northwestern Luzon. Our excavation in Sinai, Ilocos Sur also showed some of these gold debt assemblages. The Bolinao finds also have that. So they're quite similar, but not as ornate, I would say. So like the Ilocos example is just a plain rectangle. I was able to present this in the other session, also with this conference. So I had a photo of that. It's just a rectangular piece, and not as ornate as the ones presented by my colleagues, Sir Spera here, and Victor Australia, and of course Dr. Baker, Pastrana Baker. Thank you.
This is kind of also a follow-up question for Migs. I think, Ken, everyone's still trying to put their questions together for you, so we'll start first with Migs. There's another question from an anonymous attendee. How do you take into consideration the environmental changes and social changes in mapping the old settlements? For example, rivers may change course, or the people may abandon and then create new settlements, but they call their settlements the same as the old one that's been abandoned. Actually, this goes into a question I have of my own, because you mentioned the confirmation of markets can be inferred from the existence of trails. For instance, from the mines to Butuan using satellite and infrared mapping. But these bustling markets existed more than 500 years ago. Could the environment have changed, as the other person is asking? Rivers may have silted, or trails may have shifted by landslides. By the way, your maps really speak to me, because as a map enthusiast, I understand the need to look for archival maps. And I totally agree with Dr. Rodriguez that to compare them with the maps of today, using the technology today, will be fantastic to find these changes, because I'm sure there have been changes in 500 years.
Yes, indeed. In Northwestern Luzon, that was the one of the advantages of that research. We had the availability of archival maps, not only from repositories in Spain, but our own archives, so through the collaboration with Director Rino Manalo. So perhaps there are also archival maps in Butuan. Thank you also for that question on the possibilities of changes. So actually, yeah, that can happen. I guess geologic time will have all these natural occurrences. So as you mentioned, siltation, erosion. 500 years is not really too far back in time, but in terms of geologic time, we'd expect a lot of changes. Unless there are catastrophic, I would say, events like the volcanic explosions or tsunamis, perhaps. But yeah, that's a limitation. We are working with what we have now and trying to arrive at a baseline. But the actual groundwork will reveal, for example, sedimentation and other natural processes that happen in the area. But just for starters, we have a baseline. and we can use this as a map when we do the actual.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I think the National Archives may have some maps that could be interesting to look at too.
Yes.
That's just my take. There's a question from Mr. Antonio de Castro for you, Ken. We are fascinated by the finished products of the gold that you showed, and they speak volumes of the culture, the producers, and the consumers. The talk by Mr. Esguerra presents the technological process in their production. The question is, do we have the actual tools used as the artifacts themselves? The fine and intricate work seems to require proper tools for the production of these pieces. But I have not seen, or I may have missed in your presentation, pictures of the tools. You mentioned hammers and chisels, etc., but have we actually seen any of these?
Well, actually, that's a very good question. And only the molds and the templates have been found. But the tools themselves, which can be made of a softer material, like perhaps some organic material like bamboo or wood, might have already deteriorated and joined the earth. And of course, you don't use gold for your hammer or your mallet. You use iron at that, and it really could have really oxidized and corroded. And again, they were not given importance at all. They were not part of these funerary goods or grave goods. So they were just left. So in my statement earlier, I said, until perhaps there can be an excavation to chance upon an artisan's workshop where you can see the traces of the tools, then that will be fine. Because even with a hardened bamboo, it can punch or do some chasten hammering on this gold. That's how soft and malleable this pre-Hispanic gold is. So I hope that answers the question of Mr. De Castro. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken. There's a question we have for Mr. Arnel EY for you, Biggs. Good morning. Were the ancient gold digs up in the places where the Butuan gold originates? Do the gold trails imply that the Butuan Center was a major community trading place? Or does it imply that the ancient kingdom of Butuan was really larger than we thought? I'm just curious because marami akong naririnig about ancient Butuan but have not really verified. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I would like to recommend perhaps if you can look at the work of Victor Estrella, Dr. Baker Capistrano Baker, and the upcoming talk of Dr. Bologna. So this really looks into social complexity. For this particular research, it's really the producer up to the Coastal Maritime Trading Center. So it's hard to say right now, but we can talk of interaction spheres. So definitely trade is happening, exchanges of ideas, materials. But sorry, but I pass you to my colleagues who have more research about this. Thank you.
Thank you. There's some comments for both of you from social media and from the Zoom chat group. One is from Patricia Dakudao. If one compares the gold artifacts from the Philippines and Butuan with those of other countries over different time periods, it really shows how rich this country is, not only in terms of the volume of gold used, but also in the quality of the craftsmanship. Dr. Joseph Adrian Buensalido says to both of you, thanks for the lectures. I'm convinced that the Spanish colonization made us lose our original advancement in terms of culture and skills. Okay, I have my own ideas of that, but I won't get into that. With this knowledge of our past, how do either of you think we can incorporate all of this as we move forward? We are now and re-advance ourselves into a better future. Ooh, that's a loaded question.
Dr. Mix, can you do it alphabetical? Kanilaw, Esguerra, or you want Esguerra?
Okay, sir. Okay po. Well, we are at least I guess using interaction spheres. So the idea of interaction spheres means there's some cooperation and then competition. Also, of course, it's not like a very perfect classical age, but there's cooperation definitely. Some competition, one could argue, and I would more reference it back more on the Northwestern Luzon research that I've been working on. So we look at what we call the peer polities. So they appear to be evenly spaced in geographic, in terms of geographic distribution, which allows them some autonomy, but at the same time a bit of interaction. And it's really an arrangement that caters into the Indian Ocean, West Philippine Sea, the bigger, the macro scale of trade that's already in our shores. So in terms of learning from this, we are cosmopolitan even before Spanish contact. That's why we have diasporas of Persians, Chinese, Japanese even, Indians. And of course, we are bombarded with products from overseas. So all these blue and whites, and of course, porcelain. And what came out, well, perhaps gold was one of the items, I would say. Thank you, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Yeah, my take to this is really bringing forward how should I put it, the awareness to all these things. A lot of material has been lost from the past, and it's only through these exhibitions, this research work that is shared in conferences like these, and in even manuscripts, publications, that you get the people, the common tao, interested in looking into it, in getting that knowledge, so that we eventually take care of what we have or what we had. So awareness is really important, and I guess that goes to anything. And that's really our role in the museum world, to share these exhibitions, these particular objects. Because as I put it, objects are catalysts of information. In an exhibition, you cannot put out everything. The viewer has to be able to examine the piece, get himself or herself interested, and do a continued research or get that inspiration out of. And the basic really is love the earth, love what you have, love your culture, love humanity for that matter, and do your role. My mentor, Miss Feliz Santa Maria, when I was starting out with my work as a young museum worker then, told me, Ken, do your share, do your best. Things will fall into their proper place. And eventually, you are part of a bigger or grander system that will help us. And that's what I'd like to share every time I talk, especially to both students and teachers as well. Especially teachers. Ito na, nag-lecture na. You have a very important role in the society. Don't just say teacher lang. No. The command over your students is very important. What they learn in classroom, they will bring with them. And to me, that is what is important. That knowledge that you can use positively in life and in dealing with co-humans or Filipinos at that. Anyway, thank you.
Good answer from both of you. I have to say that in all of this, I agree 100% with the teacher, Ken, and with the archaeologist and anthropologist in you, Dr. Canilao. Everything in this world is interrelated. You cannot just pick one over the other. And it's that basic interest and curiosity that drives everyone into doing what they do and finding it for the greater good. Okay, having said that, I'll move on to more questions now. There's a question from Mr. Virgilio Reyes. He's tuning in from New York. Are there indicative objects found with the jewelry by which one could more accurately date these? I guess this is for you, Ken.
We've used really associated or relative dating. That's why it's 10 to the 13th centuries, because these are song material, trade ceramics from China. So that association, so they can either go older or younger at that. But perhaps even older, because before the trade material arrives in the Philippines, it was already produced in China. Pero syempre not traveling 100 years naman. But that sort of thing. And that's the beauty of archaeology. It's doing some intelligent guesswork and puzzling the pieces together. And what Dr. Mig said earlier, the peership or collaboration among scholars, among various fields is highly important. Let's not quarrel. Let's discuss and come out with or not solutions, but more of answers to our theories, our hypotheses. That's it. Thank you. But
There's
science, again, has not found an exact way of measuring gold. In fact, when we brought the gold, some pre-Hispanic gold to Singapore, with permission of some of the private lenders, they were subjected to tests of the mercury content, because we all know that in producing gold, in extracting gold, you use mercury, which is very harmful. And now with the consciousness of mercury, maybe younger materials fashioned out of gold might have used less mercury because of that consciousness among the people that had them. However, there was nothing conclusive. So, hirap talaga kasi cannot date gold. As what Dr. Baker said, there's a fixed gold that the earth has currently, whether it still has to be excavated or it's in part of the earth or already turned into artifacts such as what we are displaying right now. So, hindi pa rin talaga. Hopefully, scientists will be able to develop a method to say that this was worked on at this particular period or time in history. Kasi forgers still exist, are around, trying to duplicate, replicate, and pass them on as old materials. Pero somehow, the style and the craftsmanship would say a lot. Kaya, uy, fake yan. Uy, genuine yan. Uy,
I guess that's for like a period of 300 years, you can't really pinpoint, no?
Yeah.
Whether it was 1027 or 1152.
Yeah.
So, yeah. You spoke of Dr. Mixik earlier. There's a follow-up question. The Repoussé Garuda earrings mentioned by him are uniquely ours. Do we see finds of this design in the Philippines? Are there other cases of this? For you, Ken?
Oh, okay. That's for me. Yeah. In fact, the museum has 2 pairs. I know of a private collector who has a bigger pair, and I think it's not for the ear; it's more for the arm. It's that huge. It's a knuckle-size Garuda, and I hope in Dr. Mixik's talk this afternoon, nag-advertise na ako, he makes mention of this. Because I vividly recall in 2008, he said that. Not unless he has new finds saying that these were trade wares that eventually landed in the Philippines. Anyway.
Okay. There's a message for Migs from Greg Ontiveros. Thank you for the amazing insights from your study. In the formation of reducciones or townships by the Spanish, they generally follow the LCP or along major waterways which coincided with your layout. All townships formed by the Spanish missionaries in the Agusan River Basin were along waterways. In fact, Moncayo Plain represented the endpoint of the Agusan River system before the steep terrain towards the headwaters. The trail towards Habonga and Tubod generally follows the Kalinawan River, the outlet of Lake Mainit. Your presentation has tremendous significance to our study of the formation of Spanish-era townships in the Agusan Basin. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the information as well.
There's another question, I guess, for both of you For gold artifacts or anything discovered, excavated by foreign archaeologists in the Philippines, who does ownership pertain to? To them or their state, or to the country? The Philippines, meaning the Philippines. Would you know, Ken?
Can I be the first one to answer?
Or reverse
Yeah,
alphabetical?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
What I know of is by law, ownership belongs really to the state or the government. However, the National Museum is kind enough to do a split. It becomes half-half, or sometimes a 70-30, wherever. If the National Museum spends a lot, maybe they get the 70% or the 30%. Now, if it's a foreigner leading the archaeological expedition, it's between the financier and this foreigner. If he's been tapped to do archaeological work, it's definitely the financier. However, this has to be submitted to the National Museum, definitely, because no fines really belong to the person or the owner of the land. The government has to
Agreed.
take, the state has to take to this. That is what I know.
There's a follow-up question from Mr. Antonio de Castro for a comment. Yesterday, Sir Estrella talked of itinerant gold craftsmen. Would Sir Esguerra and Dr. Canilao have any data on inter-island Philippine trade in gold as raw material or as finished products? And a follow-up question to Sir Esguerra regarding the tools. Could a museum nevertheless produce these tools made of bamboo and iron and other materials out of speculation, so viewers can have some idea about such tools, if not exactly as artifacts, but replicas? Thank you.
Okay, perhaps I should answer the first one, which is about. Wait, I forgot. What's the first question?
Well, the first one was any data on inter-island
Data.
trade.
Okay,
Yeah,
data on
gold.
inter-island. We're doing an exhibition on ceramics, trade ceramics, and there's a lot of exchange of these trade ceramics coming in and being dispersed in the different islands of the archipelago. And perhaps as well, there can be trade of gold, especially when used as money. Now, for the itinerant craftsmen, that's a strong possibility, because they were traveling the region as well, offering their skills and talent. Like the visual artist of the past, like Simon Flores was peddling his artistry among the rich of lowland Luzon. Anyway, things like that. Now, in displaying materials, a museum definitely should display what's original, what's authentic, what's been in existence, and providing these tools maybe for a workshop, especially for children, for kids, in an activity center that can be or portion, an interactive portion in a museum, but not together with our own original, authentic pieces. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Okay. Migs, you have anything to add to that? Or I have another question for you.
Just quickly, I guess I'd Butuan is not the end destination. It's just part of the itinerary. So these are island hopping vessels. So they definitely stop from island to island, and that's the beauty of it. It means we're part of that big hula or the
We're
exchange.
part of a trading web.
Yep.
That spans from us to all the way to the Africa and beyond, right?
Yep.
And this is a follow-up also for you, Migs. Yesterday, Dr. Baker mentioned how the Philippines is normally not part of the Southeast Asian map when it comes to trade. In your talk, you used Chowdhury's Venn diagram, which actually puts the Philippines still at the periphery. Do you think that now we can put another circle for contact points in the diagram to include Butuan?
That's a good question, because I guess Miss Marga, being with the Map Society, you know about the scales, like large-scale maps, small-scale maps. So the Chowdhury map is an example of a small-scale map, and once we start working on the larger-scale maps, then that's where we can put in more details, which is based on archaeological excavation, shipwreck data, So I guess we are in that process already, coming up with the large-scale maps. The Manggian map includes the Philippines as a secondary route. There are publications, Francodio, and another underwater archaeologists that really focus on Southeast Asia, and it shows the trade routes passing through the Philippines, splitting somewhere in Lubang Island. So yeah, we were in the process of coming up with more large-scale maps, and the archives will be. It was going to be exciting to look at
That's going to be very exciting, fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Buensalido has a follow-up comment. Any research or experience regarding Japanese gold hidden in the Philippines? Ooh. When I was in Surigao, I was shown a handwritten map showing the rough location of alleged Japanese gold and invited to join a small expedition of less than 10 people. I didn't join, but I was wondering if you had reliable documentation of this type of gold, apart from the usual myths that abound. Wow.
If I may, my colleague, actually, Victor Estrella, has done some work on, an ethnography of treasure hunting, and these are the stuff that really fuel this. Officially, the NCCA will be issuing permits for treasure hunting and archaeology as well. So that's a reality here in the Philippines. It is really in the system. It's a part of our society, treasure hunting and all this fabled gold.
Patricia Dakudao actually has a comment for you, Migs. This might be helpful. The University of Michigan anthropologist Carl Gute left an account of an 11-day trek along the Saug River from Tagum to Moncayo in 1924. Are you aware of that work?
Nope. Thank you for that information. It's really very helpful. Thank you.
And finally, there's a comment from another anonymous attendee. Hello to everyone. May I reiterate the call of Dr. Nina Baker yesterday that perhaps it is time to incorporate this new knowledge and these studies on these precious gold objects and its role in the overall development of the country in our school curricula, so that knowledge learned is updated, augmented by these exhibitions and learning programs in museums. It's very true. I agree totally. And another comment by Mr. De Castro, a final comment. Perhaps Professor Mixic's talk may provide some answers to the questions about the link between Butuan and the Philippines with other Southeast Asian locations of gold craft. The talk will be this afternoon. I'm also plugging Ken. Before we end the Q&A, I'd like to ask both of you, Migs and Ken, if you have any last words that you'd like to share with everyone. You know, we have over 400 people watching today and attending. It's a good number. So if you have any parting words of wisdom, we would love to hear. You want to start first, Migs, or alphabetical again?
Sir, you want to go?
Okay, in terms of age, siguro, seniority. Okay, parting words. Well, thank you so much for spending time this morning with us in this conference, which is really very enlightening for us as well, and for sharing that knowledge that we have, especially me coming from the museum. We really would like you to come and visit or check us out online. We'd like to reach the most number of Filipinos, for that matter, to share the information, the knowledge that is open to all, because this really would talk about who we are as a nation and the pride building, and to really become one. That's the sad part. We are not one. And my answer to that is because each and every Filipino is intelligent, and we've always been conquered by all these conquistadors, these colonizers, these imperialists. So anyway, it's another long story for me. But of course, again, thank you so much. And to the conveners, to you, Ms. Marga, and the rest of the team, Dr. Canilao, thank you very much. Good day and stay safe. The virus is still with us. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Marga. Thank you, Sir Kenneth, and of course, Dr. Noel. Thank you for this opportunity, and to all the organizers. So, kicking off from the pandemic, which Sir Kenneth mentioned, so we are starting to see the opportunity to conduct fieldwork again. So, for archaeology, it's been stopped. The fieldwork has been stopped for a while. But in terms of this research, it will be really exciting to collaborate with other specialists, art historians, historians, ethnohistorians, oral tradition experts, and of course, local communities, the indigenous groups in the area. Perhaps we can really see if they have oral tradition accounts about this gold exchange before Spanish contact. So there's much opportunity ahead, and to our audience, thank you for the additional information that's really helpful about the trails, about the accounts. So these accounts, it's a similar thing in Northwestern Luzon. They have proven very useful in locating all these ancient trails. So there's opportunity for collaboration and synergy of efforts. So looking forward to this. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much to both our speakers this morning. Very, very engaging. We also thank you, our participants, for joining us today. Please allow me now to read the Certificate of Appreciation for both speakers. Could I ask the technical team to flash the certificates on screen, please? The certificates of appreciation are for Michael Armand P. Canilao and Kenneth C. Esguerra for their participation in the Philippine International Quincentennial Conference Session 11, entitled Early Philippine and Southeast Asian Boat Building and Gold Crafting Technology, on 7 December via Zoom webinar. This session is co-convened with, may I ask the technical team to make it a little, thank you. Co-convened with the Father Saturnino Urios University and National Historical Commission of the Philippines. The National Quincentennial Committee was created through Executive Order 55, Series of 2018, to prepare the country in commemorating the 500th anniversary of the victory in Mactan, the Philippine part in the First Circumnavigation of the world, and other related events. The PIQC is also in solidarity with the Year of Filipino Pre-Colonial Ancestors and the Philippine-Spanish Friendship Day. So you will both be receiving the certificate in soft copy soon. And thank you again. And if I could, I think the main takeaway for me for this morning's presentations are that Butuan and Northern Mindanao could very well have been a primary market for the gold and other products as well, given the possibility of lode and placer mines in the area, which, by the way, before today, I didn't know what a placer mine was. Thank you, Dr. Canilao. The trails and the settlements leading to and from these locations. Although you need to do more detailed research, mapping these routes and settlements from these mining locations to Butuan can indeed be traced. And from Mr. Esguerra's presentation, we certainly know that there were goldsmiths and artisans who knew how to work with the gold. It's fascinating. Thank you again. For the Zoom attendees, Zoom has automatically logged your attendance today. Please check your emails for the panel evaluation form that will be sent to you within the next 24, maybe 48 hours. Note that the evaluation links are only for registered Zoom participants. Before we end today's session, Dr. Rodriguez, co-convener of this session, would like to give a few words regarding the next few sessions and panels. Dr. Rodriguez, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Marga. So thank you to everyone. Thank you for being with us in panel C. So we spoke about trails and ways and the essence of gold itself, which reflect culture and society. So this afternoon, please join us at 2 p.m. for more on gold. Dr. John N. Miksik of the National University of Singapore shall speak on the Philippines in Southeast Asian perspective as seen through a golden lens. Again, this conference runs from December 6 to 10, Join us for more deep and meaningful discussions on the early Philippine and Southeast Asian boat building and gold crafting technology. On behalf of the Father Saturnino Urios University and the National Quincentennial Committee, we wish to thank those also behind the scenes, the conference secretariat, Joseph Alec Guerradilla, and of course, thank you to our speakers, Dr. Michael Armand Canilao of the Philippine National Museum. And before I end, I would want to say it is not much known and not much publicized, but he came out with a book entitled Remote Sensing the Margins of the Gold Trade, where he looks at ethnohistorical archaeology and GIS analysis of 5 gold trade networks in Luzon. So he has published this work already and is available to all, though it's quite difficult to obtain. So I think it should be published in the Philippines as well, Migs. And of course, thank you as well to Mr. Kenneth Esguerra of the Ayala Museum. And we hope that the gold exhibit shall be open soon, and the public can come and look at all the artifacts that you have just shown us. And of course, to our moderator who did a splendid job, Ms. Marga Binamira of the Philippine Map Collectors Society. Thank you so much. This is Feliz Noel Rodriguez, co-convener of this conference, saying thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. And with that, this is Marga Binamira, your moderator. Thank you also for joining us, and we wish you all a good day.
Thank you.